Hello, everyone, and welcome to MiTalks, a MiVTTP webinar. This week, we're excited to talk about elevating talent, Michigan's clean mobility workforce, featuring our very special guest, Chase Attanasio. So we'll take a little bit of time to go through our agenda. I'll walk you through what to expect. We're going to do some welcome and introductions. And then I'll give you a bit of an overview and update on my VTIP program. And then we'll get right into the meat of our time together, which is Chase's presentation on the upcoming workforce. Then we'll have a few minutes at the end for questions and answers and talking about next steps. First, I want to welcome you all to the space, introduce myself. My name is Latricia Mitchell. I'm a project manager with the Economic Growth Institute, and I serve and support in our community engagement initiatives. And I want to us have a chance to get to know one another as well. So if you could take some time in the chat to please share your name, your affiliation, or your organization, and share a little bit about what you're hoping to gain from today's session. What questions are you bringing in, or who do you represent when you think about these clean jobs in this new environment that we're in? And while you do that, I'll introduce you to the rest of the MiVTTP team, many of whom you may have met before in these engagements or around this ecosystem. So we have some wonderful folks at the Economic Growth Institute and Michigan Clean Cities / Next Energy that I wanted to share with you. Great team members here that are doing the work. I like to say that we have a very deep bench of folks with different skill sets across the ecosystem, whether that's workforce development, technical assistance, just the clean energy environment altogether, and of course, economic growth and transformation. That's a little bit about us. Mary Ammerman is here in the room today. So thank you, Mary, for being here. So another one of our experts in community engagement and strategic planning. So while you keep doing some introductions in the chat, we'd love to get to know you. Thank you for being here. If you could please share, I'll go back so you can see for some folks here, your name, your affiliation or organization, and what you're hoping to gain from today's session. All right. Moving right along while you do that, I will talk with you a little bit about the MiVTTP program and the overview. So the MiVTTP is a 3-year program funded by the U.S. Department of Energy, and we have 3 phases of this program: community listening sessions, strategic planning, and workforce development and technical assistance support to communities. We support 11 communities across the state of Michigan, many of which are in Southeast Michigan, and then a few further north, as well as Flint and Lansing. And across these communities, we want to understand communities' needs and impacts of the EV transition. Through our strategic planning phase, we want to help communities provide action plans that would best support workforce development and technical assistance. We also want to support these community responses to the unique challenges and opportunities that we see occur in this ecosystem and in this day and age. And lastly, and very importantly, and quite relevant to our time together today, we want to promote higher job placement in MiVTTP communities. And that brings us to what MiTalks is all about. We want to create a space for community members and for folks across the ecosystem to connect, to network, and to receive some great information from our experts across the community. And we have that before us today. I'm excited to introduce you to and present our speaker for this morning, Chase Attanasio. Chase is a policy manager with Clean Fuels Michigan, which, if you did not know, is a nonprofit trade organization that's dedicated to growing the clean mobility sector in Michigan. And as a policy manager, Chase supports Clean Fuel Michigan's legislator education and advocacy in Lansing. Chase recently led efforts to update Clean Fuel Michigan's Clean Mobility Career Pathways report, which is a resource that provides information about emerging careers in Michigan's clean mobility sectors. Chase, we're so looking forward to hearing from you today, and we're thankful that you've joined us. Welcome, Chase. I'll give you a chance to get your screen up.
Great. Thanks so much, Latricia. Great to see everyone. Appreciate you spending the lunch hour here on the My Talk session and listening to my presentation. Like Latricia mentioned, I'm really excited today to deliver this presentation on elevating talent, Michigan's clean mobility workforce. And Latricia gave a great introduction. Sorry, good. Chase Attanasio with Clean Fuels Michigan. Like Latricia mentioned, we're a nonprofit trade association, and we work with businesses and other stakeholder groups in Michigan's clean mobility sector and work to advocate in Lansing on behalf of these industries. We also have a sister nonprofit, the Michigan Clean Fuels Institute, which acts as a source of information on Michigan's clean fuel sector, and leads in research and reports related to the clean mobility industry in the state. To give you a sense of our membership with Clean Fuels Michigan, we have businesses and other stakeholder groups that really span Michigan's clean mobility sector, automotive manufacturers and electric vehicle charging OEMs, and then businesses also involved in other alternative fuels, including propane and hydrogen, biofuels like biodiesel and ethanol. So we work on behalf of these organizations to advance their priorities and make sure that Michigan is a place where they can be doing business and excelling and growing there. I want to give a brief agenda for what we can expect to cover during my presentation today. I'm going to start things off with kind of a state of play, how things are developing in clean fuel vehicles and infrastructure, the recent market trends, and why it's important to be talking about workforce development, and how that relates to clean fuels workforce demand that we're seeing. Then I will highlight some of the findings from Clean Fuels Michigan's Clean Mobility Career Pathways report that Latricia mentioned, and we'll spend some time talking about the findings there. And then we'll wrap up with some workforce gaps, what's working in Michigan, and what we can expect next. And then I will make sure to save some time at the end for questions. Feel free, if you have questions along the way, to just pop those in the chat too, and happy to go back to those when we have time. All right, so like I said, we're going to kick things off about kind of the state of play. Why are we talking about transportation decarbonization? Why are we talking about clean fuels? I want to start off with some of the state goals that have been created over the past 5 or 6 years or so. Really, this starts off in 2020. Governor Whitmer delivered an executive directive directing the state to reach economy-wide carbon neutrality by the year 2050. In order to accomplish that, the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, or EGLE, helped to put together with a lot of stakeholder feedback the My Healthy Climate Plan, which outlined each of Michigan's different sources of carbon across the different economies, and how each of those economies need to decarbonize in order to meet that carbon neutral goal by 2050. In the mobility sector, a group of state agencies, which included EGLE, the Michigan Department of Transportation, the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, and the Michigan Office of Future Mobility and Electrification, put together the My Future Mobility Plan, which put forward the goals for transportation decarbonization, which included having 100,000 electric vehicle chargers deployed to support 2 million electric vehicles by 2030. This will, according to the plan, keep us on track to meet that carbon neutral goal by 2050. A focus on transportation is really critical when talking about state climate goals in Michigan. The transportation sector alone accounts for 30% nearly of all greenhouse gas emissions. So a particular focus on the transportation sector is really critical here. A lot of these state reports and state goals, like I mentioned, are really rooted in environmental impacts and reducing the environmental impacts of our daily operations. But there's also really significant economic benefits to pursuing transportation decarbonization technology in Michigan. By setting these really clear state goals and pursuing transportation electrification and other clean fuel solutions, Michigan has benefited from billions of dollars in private investment across clean vehicle manufacturing and component manufacturing and fueling infrastructure deployments. And we've also seen large-scale public investment from both the federal and the state level, both on, again, infrastructure and technology deployments, but also in retooling our existing automotive workforce and automotive supply chains to meet the transition needs of the automotive sector. And we're seeing this transition result in significant job growth, which will be the topic of our discussion today. In 2022, there was a 14% growth in jobs in clean mobility. And the state added 5,400 clean energy jobs, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the more recent numbers there. Relatedly, on economy, I just want to also frame the discussion. When we're talking about the automotive industry, I think it's easy to get caught up in headlines that we're seeing in particular over the past year or so about the direction of the automotive industry. you're likely to think that there's been a pullback in electrification. And while certainly things aren't moving as expeditiously as I think many of us had hoped they were, it's important to remember that Michigan's automakers and the American automotive industry competes on a global stage. And so I wanted to just spend a quick second here talking about how things are developing globally. And it's clear that the message is that electrification is the future and that automakers can either transition or risk being left behind. I put this image here on the left to show this is economy-wide car exports, so not just electric vehicles. This is across all powertrains, what countries are doing in terms of global exports. And you can see in the last 10 years or so, the United States has remained relatively stagnant in terms of vehicle exports. And the notable item on here is China's automotive exports have really exploded in the last 5 years. They now export 5.7 million cars annually. And China actually exports more electric vehicles alone than the United States exports across all of its powertrains. And so we're seeing this significant growth in China's automotive exports being really driven by their significant investments in electric vehicle manufacturing, which is undoubtedly benefited by large scale public investments in EV and automotive manufacturing in the state and really concise and targeted industrial policy. And this chart here on the right just shows, in terms of electric vehicles, where imports and exports are coming from. And you can see that China by and far dominates the electric vehicle industry currently. And so in terms of the future of the automotive industry, if the United States and in more particular Michigan wants to remain competitive at the forefront of what's going on in the automotive industry and continue to export our vehicles around the world, we're going to need a focus on electrification. So in order to meet those climate and economic goals for the state, Clean Fuels Michigan's perspective on clean mobility is around three prongs. And the first is affordable clean vehicles. People need to be able to afford new vehicle technologies, and ideally these vehicles are being designed, researched, manufactured right here in Michigan. There also needs to be robust infrastructure. If we're talking about electric vehicles, there needs to be charging infrastructure. If it's hydrogen, there needs to be refueling, and et cetera, and so on. And then for the purposes of our conversation today, we need a capable workforce. And perhaps most critically, is we're talking about deploying these new vehicle technologies and infrastructure at scale. There needs to be a workforce that is comfortable and capable to work on these new technologies that we're hoping to deploy. So to provide a little bit of a background in how Michigan is trending in terms of electric vehicle adoption, this chart is from the Secretary of State data. They did this audit in about August of 2025. And so at that time, Michigan had 85,000, just over 85,000 battery electric vehicles, over 200,000 non-plug-in hybrids, which are also referred to as full hybrid electric vehicles, and then 18,000 plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. So these numbers put Michigan at about second regionally in the Midwest in terms of electrified powertrains that we have registered in the state. The Midwest tends to track right along with national averages. So we're moving in a similar direction as the rest of the country there. But I really want to focus in on the growth that Michigan has seen in really just the last couple of years here. Between 2024 and 2025, if we look just at the battery electric vehicle registrations, registrations in EVs grew by almost 75%. And then another way that we track growth is by market share. And a really big milestone that Michigan hit last year was that 10% of all the vehicles sold in Michigan were electric vehicles by the third quarter of last year. So when you think about it, that's 1 in 10 of all vehicles that were sold through the first 3 quarters of last year were an electric vehicle, which is impressive in and of itself. But Michigan's market share of electric vehicles grew the quickest last year. We were just above 5% in 2024. And so now tracking at 10% in 2023 was a 4.8 increase, which again is the largest jump in EV market share in the country. So I think we're seeing a lot of interest and growth in Michigan in electric vehicles because we've deployed really robust infrastructure to support those vehicles on the road. Michigan, these numbers are from the end of last year, had 5,893 EV charging ports that were available at 2,486 public charging locations. These numbers put Michigan second in terms of EV chargers in the Midwest, and Michigan's actually first in terms of the level 3 DC fast chargers per capita in the region, which is, I think, particularly impressive given the challenging geography that Michigan has compared to other Midwestern states, having two peninsulas, and with our population centers being really concentrated to the lower half of the lower peninsula. Michigan has done a really great job at building a statewide, robust EV infrastructure network, and is making really significant gains on that front. One of the biggest drivers of investment in EV infrastructure is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, also known as the NEVI program. This is a $110 million federal program that Michigan has available to invest in DC fast chargers to build a statewide fast charging network. By June of last year, the Michigan Department of Transportation had made $45 million of awards for 87 different fast charging locations, and each of those locations have to have at minimum 4 different charging access points. And these maps here just provide an idea of where approximately in the state those locations across the state are. And again, you can really see that the department really focused on a statewide network here, not just focused on our population centers, but really making sure that there's access to go places up north as well and into the Upper Peninsula. So we know in order to encourage adoption of electric vehicles that DC fast charging is needed. People need to feel comfortable that if they're going on a long road trip and they're traveling over 300 miles, that they're going to have access to public charging infrastructure and be able to charge quickly. But we also know that most charging doesn't happen at those public DC fast charging locations. Most EV drivers charge at home overnight, and recent numbers suggest that about 80% of EV drivers, their primary source of charging is at home. This presents challenges in terms of adoption for folks that don't have access to reliable parking the same place overnight, or don't have a single family home with a garage where they can install an EV charger. And so there have been interventions taken, and public funding is really a critical component here to make sure that we're meeting these gaps in areas where the market doesn't necessarily necessitate it. So focus on EV charging and expanding EV charging in multifamily housing is really critical. And then also targeted public infrastructure for things like roadside, curbside charging, and workplace charging in areas, for example, like low income areas where folks don't always have access to a reliable parking space every night. And I just wanted to also mention here in 2026, we're going to continue to see a lot of significant investment in EV infrastructure. The state will, by the end of the year, have $80 million available for applications for public charging. Most of that money is coming from the NEVI program, like I mentioned on the last slide, but there's also $15 million from a state program called the Clean Fuel and Charging Infrastructure Program that will be made available. And then there's $10 million already available through Eagle's Clean Fuel and Charging Infrastructure Program for multifamily housing charging. And then by the end of the year, we're anticipating an additional $10 million for fleet charging applications. So that was a lot of information about electrification. And I just want to spend a quick second on this slide talking about, we know that electrification works really well for the passenger vehicle use case, but we're seeing alternative fuel adoption increase in other transportation segments, in particular in the medium and heavy duty vehicle segment. When you think about like large semi trucks, rather than electrification, or in addition to electrification, fleets are exploring other alternative fuels like renewable natural gas or hydrogen to power those operations. Batteries aren't quite fit for the commercial aviation industry currently, but sustainable aviation fuel, for an example, is a great way to reduce the cost of operations, improve efficiencies, and decarbonize the aviation sector. We're seeing drop-in fuels like biodiesel, renewable diesel, and ethanol continue to grow in adoption every year. And then propane is another great low carbon fuel that's being used for applications like school buses across the state. So we'll talk a little bit more about those alternative fuels, as well as we're talking about Michigan's clean fuel workforce demand. So I provide all of that background information to suggest that despite what you might be reading in headlines, that Michigan is still making really significant gains in electric vehicle adoption, in EV charging infrastructure deployment, and then broadly in alternative fuel adoption across the state. And this is translating into a really strong clean fuels workforce demand. In 2024, Michigan had over 34,000 employees working in Michigan's clean fuels sectors and clean transportation sectors. And a report done by the World Resources Institute suggests that Michigan can expect to see about 56,000 jobs in electric vehicle manufacturing alone. So these are really significant jobs numbers and a really critical opportunity for workforce growth in the coming years. It's also really important when you think about Michigan's incumbent workforce. We have about 1.1 million workers that are employed in Michigan's automotive and mobility industries, which represents just about 20% of our total workforce. And so it's really critical that we're thinking about, as the industry is transitioning, as clean fuels continue to grow in adoption, that we're creating effective pipelines for our existing automotive workforce to transition, while also hoping to retain and build and attract new workers and skill sets that way. To provide some more information about some of the clean fuels jobs that we'll talk a little bit about today, the recent Clean Fuels report found that in 2024, Michigan added over 3,000 jobs in the clean vehicle sector, which is a 13% increase. And this makes the clean vehicle job sector the fastest growing job sector economy-wide in the Michigan economy. So not just faster than any other clean job, it's the flat out fastest growing job sector in the state. And despite the maybe road bumps that the state and the industry have impacted the industry recently, a recent report by the Bureau of Labor Statistics continues to expect that components related to electric vehicles and manufacturing and maintenance and operations will remain the fifth fastest growing industry nationwide. I mean, they're projecting that it'll add more than 48,000 jobs across the country over the next 10 years. So continuing again to see really strong expectations and growth numbers for clean fuels workforce across the state. So in response to these trends, what's going on in the clean mobility sector and what our workforce needs are projected to be and the growth that we're already seeing, Clean Fuels Michigan partnered with our members to develop our Clean Mobility Career Pathways report. And this report focused on low barrier careers that are really technical and focused in the manufacturing sector. Some of the job pathways that I have highlighted are, for example, an electric vehicle technician, manufacturing in the electric vehicle and battery spaces, and then clean fuels technicians working on alternative fuel infrastructure like propane and hydrogen. Some of the highlights of the reports, again, this report is focused entirely on entry-level, low barrier career pathways. Low barrier meaning that for any of the pathways highlighted in the report, no post-secondary degree is required in order to enroll in a training program or receive a certificate there. The report outlines career training requirements, background skills, what education might be helpful going into a training program, what certifications folks might want to look into getting if they're interested in a specific career pathway, and then some preliminary data on career outlook and how we expect those jobs to be growing compared to other careers in the coming years. It also highlights industry-led training programs, how folks can get involved in training, how they can get certified in these careers and make a career out of these different clean mobility jobs. But it's really focused, these training programs are really focused on the fundamentals. They're focused on stackable credentials, which is something we know is really critical for economic development. People need to have access to credential stacking and getting certifications that are proving that they're continuing to add to their toolkit. And then also it highlights the cross-cutting nature of a lot of these skills that are related to clean mobility jobs. One of the things I think people tend to be concerned about, not just in the clean mobility sector, but generally when entering a new workforce segment, is whether or not they'll be stuck in these careers. And I think that we're definitely seeing that that's not the case in the clean mobility sector. If you're taking a course to become certified as an electric vehicle technician, you're getting exposure to a lot of ideas like electrical wiring and software and other types of skill sets that are really beneficial across different segments. So if you went into an electric vehicle technician certification program, thinking you'd be operating on an electric vehicle, and maybe that you find that that's not your calling, things like drone manufacturing and operations, require a lot of the same skill sets and are highly transferable between industries. The next couple of slides, I just want to highlight some of our industry members that provided information about their training programs and just provide some highlights about the training programs, these industry-backed training programs that are certifying and educating people about careers in the clean mobility sector. And the first one we have here is Legacy EV, which is a curriculum and a training resource provider. And they use a train the trainer model. So when you sign up for Legacy EV training, you're getting certified not only to operate and maintain and service electric vehicles, but you can also be certified then to go back to your home shop, or if you're an educator, go back to your community college or technical school, and then be delivering training and providing certification on behalf of the curriculum there. They offer virtual and in-person options. And like I mentioned, one of the unique things about Legacy EV's program is that they offer the training materials in addition to the curriculum. So this picture here on the left shows their workbench, which is a resource that they provide to customers. And essentially what this training bench is, it's the guts of an electric vehicle kind of spread out on a workbench, and it allows the teachers or the trainers to either isolate certain segments of the powertrain, or be able to show system-wide what an electric vehicle looks like splayed out in a more kind of digestible manner. And it allows the folks receiving the training to kind of focus in and get familiarity with the electric vehicle components without having to operate on an actual vehicle itself. Another one of our members, Bosch, has their Technician Training Academy. It's focused on electric vehicles, but also on hybrid powertrains. Going back to some of the numbers, hybrids are showing a lot of really strong demand and growth in Michigan. So it's unique and appropriate that Bosch's training responds to that market demand as well. They do a combination of virtual and in-person trainings as well. They offer their training in as little as one day. And this is really important when you're thinking about your technicians having to step away to go to this training. It's sometimes not feasible, and oftentimes not feasible, for a technician to step away from their work for whether it's a week or 2 weeks, or even some semester-long classes. They can't afford to be stepping away from their work for that long, or the shop itself can't afford to be losing one of its technicians to send them to a training for that long. So being able to offer these really robust training programs, provide the fundamentals, and deliver certification in as quickly as one day is really important to minimize any impacts that, again, a technician stepping away from their work to receive the training that it would have on them. And then Bosch also offers, in addition to their EV and hybrid powertrain fundamentals courses, they offer other in-demand trainings like on ADAS, the autonomous advanced driving system. So things for like emergency braking or adaptive cruise control, those types of systems as well, which is unique there. And then a final highlight I wanted to provide was Roush Cleantech, and they're a leader in propane autogas systems across a variety of medium and heavy duty powertrain components. They offer their 1 and 2 day courses on familiarity with propane fuel and propane powertrains. Really focused again on the fundamentals, being safe around the powertrain and the fuel source, being able to diagnose really common problems, and to the extent possible, being able to address those problems in-house. And then similarly to the rest, their completion of their training program results in an industry recognized certification that the trainee can take with them moving forward. So I want to spend a little bit of time now talking about some of the challenges that we're seeing in terms of Michigan's clean fuels job sector. Start off by suggesting again that this is a highly in demand and growing sector of jobs. The Bureau of Labor Statistics projects that there will be a shortage of 35,000 electric vehicle technicians by 2028, just looking at current adoption trends of the vehicles. And so it's important that we're working to address this skills gap, and especially in Michigan, where I think we're primed to have a leadership role in terms of clean fuels jobs. Some of the challenges that we're facing are an aging skilled trades workforce. Michigan in general has a demographic issue with aging. We're losing our young population to other states, and our population is aging rapidly. So we need really targeted interventions that are retaining our existing youth here, but also attracting new workers. And I think the clean fuels sector and the jobs that are emerging in the sector are a really great opportunity to try and capture and retain some of our youth. There's also misperceptions about what a job in the clean fuel sector looks like. When we're talking about jobs like technicians and in manufacturing, I think there's generational misperceptions about what those jobs look like. I think we think about the manufacturing jobs of the olden days, and things that are just not accurate representations of what today's manufacturing and technician jobs look like. And this is especially the case when we're talking about these high-tech, really innovative technologies like batteries, like electric vehicles, and like other alternative fuels. Certainly, there are jobs that resemble the jobs that people think about when they typically think about manufacturing and technical careers. But I think that there are also a lot of new jobs that would challenge the characterization that folks have about the clean mobility manufacturing and technical workforce. We're also struggling with limited awareness among students. It's hard for there to develop a talent pipeline if folks don't know that the jobs exist. And this is a relatively unique challenge to the clean mobility sector. You know, when you think about jobs like an electric vehicle technician or an EV charger installer, these are jobs that didn't exist really 10 years ago. And so we have an entirely new segment of jobs that are being added that people just don't know about. And so we need to be doing a better job at creating awareness and advertising the careers that are being created in the clean mobility sector. Access to training programs, like I mentioned, it's hard to get technicians away from their existing jobs. We're seeing right now things like electric vehicle technician being an add-on to an existing automotive technician. It's relatively rare to see a standalone EV technician. Typically, it's an automotive technician that gets certified to operate on electric and hybrid vehicles. And like I mentioned before, it's sometimes really challenging logistically to get them away from their existing work to get trained on operating on EV and hybrid systems. And then we're also seeing instructor capacity constraints. I think we're seeing that seats are getting filled in trainings, and we're not having enough instructors to facilitate as many trainings as we need to fill the gaps that we're expected to see in terms of EV and other clean fuels technical jobs. And then the last thing on this slide, I wanted to highlight a recent survey that was done. It surveyed existing and incumbent automotive technicians across the country, and it asked them to identify areas where they felt they needed the most training content. And the majority of respondents, nearly 70%, suggested that additional training in hybrid and EV systems was the most in demand and what they were lacking the most skill sets in. So we're definitely, not only seeing in the numbers in terms of job growth, but in the incumbent workforce, automotive technicians are recognizing this area as a gap in their skill sets and an area that they're looking for additional training on. Another challenge is there's sometimes really high barriers to entries to getting folks into trainings. Like I mentioned, being able to step away is a challenge. Equipment cost for training programs can sometimes be a really big barrier, especially if a training program is self-funded and they're trying to scrap together funding to put the right resources and materials together for a clean mobility training program. Certification alignment can be a challenge because the industry is so new and continually innovating. Making sure that training programs continue to deliver to the most up-to-date resources and information and technology is really critical. And then lack of career navigation support and shortage of long-term career data are additional challenges. it's hard to share about what to expect in terms of a clean mobility career when the job itself hasn't existed for over a decade yet. And so being able to tell a story about what career growth looks like. We have ideas and we can make hypotheses about what that looks like, but we just don't have the story to tell yet. And so doing a good job at tracking career outcomes of folks who are going through these training programs and figuring out what their career placement is like, how their career is growing and evolving over time, getting that data will be really critical moving forward. And then I want to make the argument again that this is supporting Michigan's clean mobility workforce is really critical to our state's economic competitiveness. We know that large-scale investments in vehicle manufacturing and in infrastructure deployments are tied to workforce readiness. Businesses are keenly aware of where there are workforces that are primed and ready to meet their needs. And we're seeing a lot of competing states investing heavily in workforce development. I made the argument at the start of the presentation that the United States has strong competition with China and the European Union, but Michigan domestically is facing regional challenges from other states that are doing this investment and looking to attract the next generation of the automotive workforce. This chart on the left provided by Mich Auto shows at large automotive production across the United States. And again, where we're seeing since the COVID-19 pandemic, the Midwest production staying relatively stagnant, that we're quickly being outpaced in terms of vehicle production growth by the South, and particularly the region of the Southeast, comprised of Georgia, the Carolinas, and Tennessee. And similarly to the situation with China, I would suggest that this growth here is being driven primarily by electric vehicle production. This map here on the right focuses just on electric vehicle jobs, and you can see that Michigan is still doing well for itself and is second only to Georgia. When you look regionally, the Southeast is outpacing the Midwest in terms of electric vehicle jobs there. All this to say that Michigan really needs a coordinated strategy on how we're going to prepare our workforce, deliver a capable workforce so that Michigan remains a compelling place to invest and support the future of the automotive sector. All right, wrapping things up here, I want to talk about what's working well for us in Michigan. The first is our existing incumbent, highly skilled automotive workforce and the talent pipelines that exist. Michigan has a large swath of universities and community colleges and technical schools that have historically provided really strong talent pipelines for our automotive industry. And they're used to and familiar with making adjustments and changes to innovations in the industry. So continuing to encourage our education ecosystem to meet the needs of the industry is really critical. Partnerships with OEMs and OEMs being really transparent about the direction that the industry is heading so that our educational ecosystem can meet the needs of the industry is really important. And we're already seeing these adjustments being made. If you look at existing automotive programs at community colleges and universities, they're offering courses or segments of courses focused on exposure to electric vehicle, hydrogen powertrains, certifications in battery technology, and these types of things. It's also really important that in something that the industry has been doing really well is driving the certification and training programs, ensuring that the trainings and certification programs that we're developing are responding directly to industry needs is really critical to make sure that career placement is taking place directly after the certification and that we're continuing to enable the transition towards cleaner mobility solutions by providing the most relevant training and certifications that are necessary. We're also seeing significant federal and state support here. We've seen a huge shift in focus and a refocus on domestic manufacturing. I think that started really with the Biden administration, significant investments through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act that spurred a lot of growth in Michigan's clean mobility and electric vehicle manufacturing. And despite some of the recent policy decisions, the current administration continues to message on maintaining the country's manufacturing prowess. And so I think, again, despite some of the policy decisions, I think there's still overlap between Michigan's electric vehicle clean mobility sector and making sure that we're seeing this domestic manufacturing resurgence that the federal administration has been messaging on. We're also seeing those large scale infrastructure and technology investments like the NEVI program that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. We continue to deploy these new technologies at scale, which is creating new jobs and new demand for these jobs. And then state programs like the Going Pro Talent Fund have been a really critical source of funding directly to businesses to allow them to fund some of these training opportunities. The Going Pro Talent Fund is a program that's been around for over a decade and funds training across different sectors. It's not restricted to just the mobility or the clean mobility sectors. But we've seen in the past 5 or 6 years or so, a lot of businesses across the state are using this funding source as an opportunity to train new employees on new technologies in the clean mobility sector and also reskill, retool, upskill their current and incumbent workforce on those technologies as well. I also mentioned earlier that career awareness and student exposure to these programs is a challenge, but I think we're taking the right steps to address that challenge. 2 things that I highlighted here, the University of Michigan's Center for Digital Curricula partnered with the Electric Vehicle Center and other partners to put together a really interesting tool for educators in the K through 8 space to expose their students to careers in the electric vehicle and broadly in the mobility space. I highly recommend that if you're interested in this, you check it out. It's a really cool resource, and they have a lot of information about some of the outcomes there. But it really just gets students learning and engaged about things related to electric vehicles and in the mobility sector. And then relatedly on the left, I highlighted one of Clean Fuels Michigan's members, Highland Electric, developed in partnership with curriculum designers, civic science and environmental justice curriculum for grades 6 through 12. Highland Electric supports school districts through the adoption of electric school buses. And so when a school district partners with Highland, this is one of the resources that they provide to the school district to get students thinking about and excited about the deployment of electric school buses in their school district and understanding, what that means from like a career standpoint as well. So those are 2 resources that I think are important there in educating our students about the future of clean mobility careers. Right. And to wrap up here, I think looking forward, how we're supporting Michigan's clean fuel workforce development, the role of the industry, I really see continuing to host interns and apprentices, getting more folks involved in these jobs. Again, creating space for them within the workforce will be critical. Curriculum co-development, I mentioned earlier, that's one of the things I feel industry is doing really well, is having a seat at the table, being honest about what their workforce needs are and helping curriculum developers develop a curriculum to respond to those needs. The industry can and should continue training support, whether it's like donations of technologies to reduce the cost of a school providing a program, or again, just having a seat at the table and being transparent about workforce needs. Career awareness campaigns could be really valuable, again, as we combat the challenge of these are really new careers, trying to demystify that a little bit and being transparent about what those jobs and careers look like in terms of salary and career growth will be really helpful. And then data sharing on workforce needs, like I said, there's still such a limited amount of data available about these careers, how we're seeing them grow and what we expect projections to be in the future, that being transparent about that from the industry side will be really important. And then I think a bit more pertinent for this group, the role of community leaders and advocates. I think from a federal and state policymaker standpoint, continuing to align funding opportunities with market demand will be critical. Understanding that despite what you might be seeing in headlines, that EV adoption continues to grow. Michigan continues to invest in EV charging infrastructure, and that alternative fuels continue to play a role in Michigan's transportation ecosystem. Demand comparable response to funding support for training programs. And that can look like support for training, expansion, and apprenticeships and programs like the Going Pro Talent Fund. Community leaders and training providers can work to reduce barriers to credentialing and support equity-focused recruitment. The automotive technician space continues to be a male-dominated field. I mean, we see a disproportionate number of white employees there. So finding opportunities to encourage women to get involved in this job sector, and as well getting minorities and persons of color involved in this job sector will be really critical. And then investing in instructor capacity, like I mentioned earlier, there's just a shortage of capacity. There's only a limited number of seats that instructors can provide for a training, and so providing support for instructors to be able to expand training opportunities will be important as well. Okay, that was the presentation. Happy to transition to questions. I also have this QR code here, which will link to Michigan, Clean Fuels Michigan's Clean Mobility Career Pathway Report, which I was referring quite a bit to there in case you're interested in more information. But I really appreciate the opportunity. I want to close before we shift to questions, thanking University of Michigan EGI team and Clean Cities and the MiVTTP partners for the opportunity. This is workforce development is an area that Clean Fuels Michigan is really excited, and as I mentioned, we see as really critical to supporting the transition towards clean mobility solutions. So appreciate you all listening to the presentation and be happy to answer questions.
Wow. Chase, absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for that presentation. I have so many questions. Super, it was incredibly in depth. I'm pleased to say that Chase has offered to share some information from his slides with us. If you have further questions or would like to learn more after this, we can send it to the group, to the registered attendees for this event. And I want to take some time for question and answer. I have a question to start, and I'll give you all some time to get your questions ready. Um, I'm curious what you think, Chase, about, let's say, I'll just really frame it. I'll share my written question. You spoke about that sort of balance between current job seekers and sort of the growing workforce, and that we need to sort of replace and get some more longevity there. So I'm just curious, how would you recommend sharing that? Let's imagine we had $1 million. Would you want to spend that money predominantly to sort of develop our current workforce, or to grow job seekers such as that younger talent that we're trying to bring in?
Yeah, I think interesting question. And I think it really gets at the fact that we do have a finite number of resources, that we can expend to support workforce development. And I don't know that I can give a good answer about like this division of dollars would be the most appropriate way to divide between existing workers and new talent. But I guess I'll just reemphasize that I think it has to be both. I think we can't go all in. Michigan, like I said, has a really robust and a really strong incumbent automotive workforce, and we have to make sure that we're not leaving them behind in the transition. So investing in resources and appropriate talent pipelines that will allow them to continue to pursue careers in the automotive industry as we transition and see growth in the clean mobility sector will be important. But like I also said, we can't meet the needs of the clean mobility sector with our existing automotive workforce alone. And I mentioned this, Michigan has a pretty strong demographic challenge ahead of itself in terms of our aging population. Providing resources and tools that make Michigan a compelling place to live and work will be important. And then making sure that the next generation of the workforce as they graduate high school has access to training programs will be important too. So that's not a great job at answering your question, but I don't really have a super good answer at like this division, if we did like a 60-40 split would be, appropriate there. I think it is really just kind of responding to the needs at the moment.
Yeah, it's hard to be strict. But based on what I'm hearing you say, it does seem like I was very encouraged to hear you share that Michigan, we see the second fastest growing workforce in EV jobs and clean mobility jobs. And it sounds like in order to maintain that growth, we do need to sort of divert some resources to developing the current workforce including job seekers and young folks that are looking for employment
Mhm.
and training opportunities. So it does seem like a good balance is necessary in order to move forward. Thank you. Other questions, feel free to get them in the chat, or you can come off of mute and share with your microphone as well. And I certainly do have another question for you. And you did answer a few of my questions already in your presentation, but I do have a few more, particularly around your community leadership questions. And so I am curious, you discussed the barriers to credentialing. So I am curious if you have any recommendations or instances that you've seen for reducing barriers to credentialing, and if this has impacted post-training job placement. You know?
Yeah, I think when you're talking about credentialing and certification, I think one of the most critical components that I've seen is that the training that if an employee or a new worker is coming into a training, that they have knowledge that the credential or certification that they're going to walk away with is industry recognized. And I think again that plays to industry needs to have a seat at the table in terms of developing the training itself, figuring out what skill sets are actually needed to perform that job. And I think there's a lot of existing consortiums and things like that that industry is participating in that are filling that role. But making sure that it's an industry recognized certification or credential is really critical. Um, Again, to make sure that people that are enrolling in those trainings have um, peace of mind, I guess you could say, that they're going to go through the training program and they're actually going to get something out of it. And they're not just spending, whether it's a day or a semester in a class to get a certification that isn't recognized by industry.
Mm, which I think is a lot of folks' fear or
Right.
concern about taking those trainings. I think given this in this ecosystem in this environment right now, but even what you've shared does promote some confidence. So that's very
Mhm.
helpful to hear. Thank you. I'm going to share out a question from Jason, who has asked, where or what regional areas are the 100,000 chargers targeted for installation, in case you
Yeah.
know, please?
Really great question. And I'm going to see if I can quickly pull up a resource that can better answer this than I can. But essentially, the answer to the question is it needs to be a statewide network of electric vehicle chargers. I think that there's room in every community across the state for an electric vehicle charger. I think the biggest differentiator will be whether the mix does every community need a level 3 fast charger, probably not, but there's um, room, I think, across the state for communities to be providing access to level 2 chargers when and where folks are parked for longer periods of time. Michigan State University actually just completed a report where they provide more geographic information in terms of like if we're going to be spending public dollars, where are the chargers best suited to be located? Um, and I am not able to pull it up right now, but I am happy to make sure, like Latricia, I can share that link with you afterwards, and it can be a follow up from this call.
Right on. That works well. Thank you. I have a question from Myra, and I'll answer your question quickly, Jason. Yes, Chase is willing to share his slides very generously. So thank you, Chase, and folks at Clean Fuels for sharing that information with us. Much of which will also be found in the report, which is publicly available as well, which we'll distribute to attendees. I have a question from Myra from Downriver Community Conference. What do you suggest community leaders and advocates do to help support apprenticeship and training expansion?
Yeah, I think maybe this looks a little bit different, depending on your role. If you're involved in like a city government, or if you're just generally an advocate, I think one of the biggest things you can do is be combating against the narrative that EVs aren't the future. I think there's still a lot of misperceptions about the direction the industry is heading. I think folks have taken the headlines that have come from the past year as the industry, in particular Michigan's automotive manufacturers, pulling back from electrification. I think just generally being an advocate for recognizing that the data shows that that's not the case. Michigan continues to see growth in EV adoption, quarter over quarter, and that electric vehicle infrastructure growth has been really significant, and that other alternative fuels have a role in Michigan's transportation ecosystem. I think those soften the conversations then when we're talking about like what apprenticeship needs are and how industry partners can connect with whether it's a high school or a local community college to develop those apprenticeship pathways.
Wow, that's exciting. Thank you, Chase. Any follow-up questions or additional questions? I've gotten most of my questions answered, but check in with the group.
Can I ask another one?
Yeah, please.
I felt we were just putting them in the chat, not saying anything.
Yeah,
Chase,
you're
this
fine. Go ahead.
great presentation. A lot of really great information that you found. Information that I'm always looking for. Trying to build a case for EVs to be an advocate for them. As it relates to hydrogen, I was just curious if you are working with MTA in Flint and their hydrogen bus program. Are you,
Yeah, I don't work with them directly, but I have been out to their site to see how they're operating their hydrogen buses. They have their on-site refueling system right there, and I think there's a lot of lessons learned from the Flint MTA about how they're operating those buses. I think well, they are like a national leader. I think a lot of transit authorities look to Flint when they're looking at hydrogen integration within their fleets. And I think the transit bus use case is a really nice one for hydrogen because they're running fixed routes, returning typically to a central location where they can install the refueling infrastructure, just like Flint has done at their bus depot there, and that by using hydrogen, it enables them to replace those longer routes where a battery solution, for example, wouldn't be able to do that. They would need to charge intermittently in order to perform a route that like a hydrogen fuel cell bus could do. So I think there's great things coming out of Flint, but we're not directly involved with their work.
thank you.
Yeah, great question. And yes, we at EGI, as you might already know, Jason too, are also partners with Flint MTA, and we've collaborated with some folks there, namely Corwin Matthews, who you probably know. And yeah, it's hard to beat some of the work that they're putting out. They're really ahead of the curve, just like Jason's already shared. Thank you so much. And thank you, Tracy, for sharing out some additional posts about the MSU research. Feel free to use and click all of these links, and we'll make them available to you as we transition. And we'll be able to share out the slides, give Chase some time. We'll do some any editing that's necessary before sharing it out. But we are just so grateful that you took the time to join us on what we expect was your lunch break, to spend the time with us and talking a little bit about where we are in this network. So thank you again, and this will be available for viewing later. Thank you all. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Latricia. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Be well.